Hello friends, family, and the broader internet. If you do not know me in real life, my name is Erica, and I am probably the person who reads the most books out of my entire social circle. And as such, I've been called upon time and time again to give my book recommendations and personalized book advice and everything on that sort of spectrum. So, because we are in quarantine end days and everybody needs a sudden new hobby, I am filming myself talking about books today. So, what I've decided to do is set myself the challenge of recommending 26 books, one for every letter of the alphabet, and then talking about each one for only 30 seconds. So, A Blade So Black by L.L. McKinney. This is a YA fantasy novel. It is an urban fantasy novel, meaning that it takes place in an urban setting, but is considered fantasy. This is an Alice in Wonderland retelling. I follow the author on Twitter. I love her a lot. And she has kind of pitched this book as like a Black Buffy. I think the pitch she usually uses is like, what if a Black Buffy fell down the rabbit hole? That's 30 seconds. Anyways, it's really good, read it. B, The Bear and the Nightingale. This is a historical fantasy novel set in Russia. I'm struggling to remember the century. Anyways, it follows a young girl who makes connections with the like spirits that are present in Russian folklore, and fights a bear spirit and makes friends with a winter spirit. Anyways, it's a fascinating book about family dynamics and very cold winters, and 30 seconds. C, Crier's War. This is a YA fantasy. It is a love story between this idiot android princess, who I love with all my heart, and this assassin girl who's out to kill the princess. It is a android dominating the humans type world, but it has very fascinating twists. Anyways, the characters are super dumb. It's insta-love, but they're so dumb I love them. That's 30 seconds. I'm moving on. Okay. Whew. This is like simultaneously way too much time to talk about a book and also no time to talk about a book. Anyways, D, The Darker Shade of Magic trilogy by V.E. Schwab. This is a book series that if you know fantasy, if you're in the kind of sci-fi fantasy book sphere, you definitely heard of this book, whether or not you've read it. A lot of people hype up V.E. Schwab and all of her work. I agree wholeheartedly. I think if you are into fantasy, like this is one of those books that got me back into reading fantasy. I have like a whole character card book set and everything. Anyways, it's fascinating. It's a classic of today. E, we're getting into the contemporaries today with The Ensemble by Aja Gabel. This book follows a string quartet through several competition years as they grow older and move on as a quartet, kind of asking the question like, who are you and what do you become as a person when your life is so intimately tied to three other people? Because like you spend your whole job and your whole music and artistic expression with four people, and how do you make that work over the span of a lifetime? Very, very beautiful book. Moving on to the letter F, we have Fireborn by Rosaria Munda. This is a YA fantasy novel about dragons, as you can see on the cover. It's about two young dragon riders from different points in society. Very fascinating on the level of, if you're interested in political philosophy or books that talk about political philosophy like I am, this one gets into it, gets into different political systems, and whether like a meritocracy really can exist kind of thing in a world that was designed by aristocracy for so long. Alright, if you're familiar with the YA fantasy series, you've probably heard of Girls of Paper and Fire. This follows a pair of concubines in the human concubines in the world of where folks who take on the appearance of beast-like demons are kind of in the highest caste. And these concubines go and serve the king, and he's terrible. Content warning, sexual assault. But anyways, it's a beautiful book about like liberation and finding like sexual freedom, and also fantasy girls falling in love. H is House of Salt and Sorrows by Erin A. Craig. This is a retelling of the 12 Dancing Princesses set in a very small fishing village. It follows a daughter of a fisherman lord man as her older sisters slowly die, and then kind of dealing with this like family curse situation, but also like magic and beautiful dresses, and it's a retelling. It's beautiful. If you're looking for a fun book that you might not have heard, this is also a fantasy book. This one's an adult fantasy book. The Invisible Library by Genevieve Cogman. There are several of these. It's kind of like Doctor Who, but for books. Basically, central library, some time traveling, shenanigans ensue. The main characters are quite lovable and fun. I recommend it if you're into sort of like a fun, fast read. I have the second one on my shelf and I'm really looking forward to reading it. So, for the letter K, I cheated and pulled The Kingdom of Copper. The first book in the series, however, is The City of Brass. This is a adult epic fantasy trilogy set in the Middle East, the Near Middle East, and pieces of Asia and Southeast Asia. It is a story about a young con woman / healer who finds out that she's part of a species of jinn and like a very highly respected family, and then goes on a, oh god, quest. Anyways, she get politics, city, big city politics, Middle Eastern inspired. This is one of my favorite books of the year. Okay, this is The Loved One by, my English professor has always referred to him as evil and wag, and that feels wrong, but maybe it's not. Anyways, this is a book about a pet cemetery and a man who does pet cremations, and he and another person fall in love with a movie star. Is she a movie star? Yeah. No, she's a corpse beautician. It's fun too. Anyways. M, The Merciful Crow by Margaret Owen. This is one of my favorite books of last year. It is a YA fantasy that follows a, oh gosh, this is a lot in 20 seconds. A girl from a traveling group of mercy killers. They are assigned mercy killer as their occupation based on their caste and their group's magic. She gets caught up in a basically a quest to bring the prince to safety. It's really good. The characters are incredible. Class dynamics. I know I'm over 30 seconds, but this book's just so good. It's one of my favorites. N, The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a historical fiction book that takes place during World War II in occupied France. It follows two sisters as they navigate different versions of femininity and different versions of resistance in this very confined space that is occupied France in the 1940s. It also has this kind of like through time narrative, which is interesting to follow. Anyways, I loved it for its commentary on femininity especially, and like what it means to resist. So my O book is Once and Future. This is another YA fantasy set in a, it is the King Arthur retelling, as you can probably tell by the title. King Arthur in this one is a girl, and she lives in a futuristic space setting where, I don't know, this is just very anti-capitalist. It's also super queer, and that's awesome. It's great. I don't really have much else to say. You've got to read it. That's the premise. It's good. For the letter P, I have one of my favorite books of 2018, which is The Poppy War. This is a story set in a fantasy version of China during like the, I think 1800s would be a good time period comparison. Anyways, follows a young girl as she becomes part of the military and practices a form of magic to communicate with the gods. In particular, a certain god who is gonna burn up the world. Okay. Anyways, this one's really heavy. If you're like into a heavy read and you want to get completely immersed, read it. I cheated for Q. The book that I pulled for Q is Quicksand by Nella Larson, but the book I actually want to talk about is Passing by Nella Larson. This is a novella. I had to read it for class like 3 different times in school, and loved it more every time I read it. It's only like, this book looks really big, but most of it is additional sources. I think the book itself is like, yeah, 70 pages that look like this. You can see I annotated it all over. Every time I read this book, I find something more to read. I never told you what it's about. It's a classic novella. It gets into race and sexuality and gender in really fascinating ways. It's set in the 1920s. It's good. Alright, I don't have a book for R. For S, Six of Crows. It's incredible. It's a heist book. I have another heist book on my list, but this heist book is really great if you want, like, cute, charming banter from your protagonist from different backgrounds, and I don't know, they're all really tragic. I love, more than anything, how Lee Bardugo does female friendships, so check that out. Okay, T is The Tsar of Love and Techno by Anthony Mara, who's one of my favorite writers. If you're, again, looking for like a more heavy read, this will be really good. It's a selection, it's a set of connected short stories, but each short story takes place in Russia, going from, when's the first one take place? Beginning in Stalinist Russia and ending somewhere in outer space in the near future, according to the New York Times review on the back. Each story is absolutely beautiful, and I don't know, he's just one of the most beautiful writers. W is We Set the Dark on Fire. This book, God, I don't even know how to get into this book. It's like one of my favorite books from the last year. It has a really interesting arranged marriage system between very rich people. It's also very anti-capitalist and has women falling in love with one another. Anti-capitalist lesbians are like, that was my jam for a period of time. It still is, but like, whew. Anyways, it's set in a Latin American inspired fantasy world. Rebellion. Love. Commentary on marriage, which is one of my favorite things. Why? I really want to shout out The Young Elites by Marie Lu. I think that Marie Lu has other series that are more revered. This one is more of a classic fantasy set in an Italy adjacent world. It is also YA. All of Marie Lu's books are YA fantasy. This one I really enjoy. If you're a person who wants to write fantasy, especially YA fantasy, I think you should read this. It's got, you know, young people who survived a plague, who get magical powers, princes, countries toppling, rebellion, yay! The Gilded Wolves. A lot of people, I think this book's adult. Apparently this book's YA. You could have fooled me. Anyways, this one takes place in France, Italy, Europe. And it's a heist novel with more adult characters. I don't know. They definitely feel like older. I think it's really unfair that those two books get compared, but here I am doing it. I really enjoy this book because it has a lot of the sort of like high tension, beautiful illustration of setting, and like just like dynamic team building that I think a good heist book should have. So if you want to read that, please read it. One of my favorite books of last year, I think the best book I read in 2019 is The Song of Achilles. I think if you have been on Tumblr between the years of 2012, is that when this book came out, and now, you've probably seen some quotes pulled from The Song of Achilles to describe people who are in love. It's a retelling of the Iliad. It's one of the most chillingly romantic, beautifully written books I've ever read. Left an imprint on my soul, all that good stuff. Alright, I'm so hungry. I don't know why, when I turned on the camera, that I suddenly got so hungry. Next book on my list is The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle, easily confused with The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Is that right? I think so. Anyways, this book is a murder mystery. with a supernatural twist, which I really wasn't expecting. It's like a fun murder mystery where the protagonist hops between bodies of different hosts at this party for 8 consecutive days, and at the end of the 8 days he has to come up with who did it. But it also gets into prison abolition and like prison reform at the end. Read it, it's wonderful. I point out this book because, again, if you're in the YA community, you've heard of it. This is The Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer. Some people love this series, some people don't like it very much. It's one of the series that like got me really back into reading when I was in high school, because like in high school you start running out of time. But I love it. It's space fantasy retelling of this one's a retelling of Cinderella, but the others are all retellings as well of different fairy tales with these charming protagonist women, their cute love interests. They go on space journeys. It's really cute. They chase each other around the galaxy a lot, which I'm all for. The last book on this list, the last book I'm going to talk about today is Four Dead Queens. This is a murder mystery fantasy book set in this world where there are like 4 quadrants that have different like ideals, and they're ruled by 4 queens, one from each. And the 4 queens are being murdered, and the main character knows how. She just doesn't know when it's going to happen. And so she has to kind of race to stop it from happening. And the twists in this book are just incredible. Like, if you're into any sort of fast-paced murder book, like murder mystery fantasy book, holy crap. The twists in this are so good. That's 26 books in 30 seconds a piece, so hopefully this will add up to a video that is the proper length. It was actually really fun to keep myself to 30 seconds, though I know I didn't talk about the premise of any of these books in very much detail at all. I just talked about like, hey, Erica likes book. So I will write short little premises in the description of each book and show you where you can find them. I really recommend using indiebound or go into your favorite independent local bookstore directly to order books from them, either for like curbside pickup, I know a lot of stores are doing that, or to get the books shipped directly to your house. Please read books while you're stuck in quarantine. You might discover that like if you're not being required to read a book, you really enjoy it. That's what happened for me. So I'm gonna get back to reading my quarantine book, which is Les Miserables. Please stay safe and help take care of each other.